It was one of those nights when the rain just wouldn't stop. The sound of raindrops hitting the roof of the patrol car and the fogged-up windows made everything feel even darker. My partner, Parker, and I were mentally preparing to wrap up our shift when the radio crackled with an emergency message. Delta Unit, we have an urgent call. Possible residential break-in. Address, 187 15th Street. Parker and I exchanged a look, the kind you give when you know the night is far from over. Parker, always the jokester, grumbled. Looks like we're not getting off before 3 tonight, huh? I gave a small smile, but there was something in the tone of the message that made me uneasy. Residential break-in is the kind of call you can never predict. It could be anything from a small-time thief to something much more serious. We turned on the sirens and sped through the wet streets. The city felt deserted at that hour. 15th Street was a quiet neighborhood, the kind people choose to feel safe. Big houses surrounded by tall trees and well-kept gardens, the kind of place where bad things supposedly don't happen. When we arrived at 987, the house was dark except for a single light upstairs. We got out of the car, flashlights in hand. Parker, always trying to lighten the mood, whispered, "This place looks like a horror movie set, doesn't it?" "I hope it's not," I replied, trying to keep things light, but already feeling the tension building up. As we approached the door, it creaked open slightly before we even knocked. A woman, probably in her 40s, stood on the other side. Her eyes were wide with deep circles under them, showing she hadn't slept much. Her brown hair was tied up in a messy bun and her hands trembled slightly. "Are you the police?" Her voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Yes, ma'am. We received a call about a possible break-in," I responded, while Parker stayed alert beside me. She opened the door a little more and stepped back, letting us in. The foyer was large but dark. Only the faint light from upstairs illuminated the space, with walls decorated with family photos and paintings. "He's here." "I know he is," the woman said, her voice a bit steadier but still filled with fear. "Calm down, ma'am." "Who exactly is here?" I asked, trying to gauge the seriousness of the situation. "My ex-husband," she replied, her eyes fixed on the staircase leading to the second floor. "He escaped from the psychiatric hospital. They called me today. He's coming to get me." At that moment, things got a lot more serious. Escaped from a psychiatric hospital? What could have been just a random burglar now turned into a very real and personal threat. Parker and I exchanged a quick glance. He immediately grabbed the radio and called for backup. "We've got a more complicated situation here," he whispered, keeping an eye on the woman. "Ma'am, what's your ex-husband's name?" I asked, trying to stay calm while the adrenaline started to kick in. "Lincoln. He was committed a year ago after what he tried to do to me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "Does he have a history of violence?" I asked, trying to get as much information as possible. She nodded. "He tried to kill me. Said if I wasn't his, I wouldn't be anyone's." Parker gave me a look I knew too well. This is going to be tough. The air was heavier than ever. "We're going to check the house. Do you have a safe place to stay while we do that?" She shook her head. "No, I can't leave. What if he gets me on the way out? It'll be all right. We just need you to wait somewhere safe while we check," I suggested. She finally agreed and locked herself in the downstairs bathroom. Parker and I began to search the house, moving slowly through the dark rooms. "I don't like this," Parker whispered as we passed through the living room. "Something feels off. I feel like he's watching us." I felt it too. A sensation of being watched, like at any moment something or someone might jump out of the shadows. We cleared the first floor and found nothing out of the ordinary. We slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath our feet. When we reached the second-floor hallway, the silence was absolute. Only the distant sound of rain outside. The bedrooms were all empty, except for one that appeared to be the woman's. The bed was messy, like she had run out in a hurry. Family photos lined the walls, but one in particular caught my attention. An old picture of what looked like her and her ex-husband, smiling together. It was unsettling to think about how much had changed. Parker called out from the other side of the hallway. "Nothing up here. Looks like it's clear." "Let's check the garage," I suggested. We headed back down and made our way to the garage. The door was slightly open, and when we pushed it fully open, A strong smell of filth and sweat hit us. We shone our flashlights inside, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. There, crouched behind a pile of boxes, was the ex-husband. He was filthy, his hair matted, and he stared at us with a twisted grin. His eyes were wide, like he was completely disconnected from reality. "She's mine," he whispered, repeating the words like a mantra. "She's always been mine." "Stand up slowly," I ordered, as Parker readied the handcuffs. He didn't resist, but the grin never left his face. "I told her I'd come back." "She knew I'd come back." Parker cuffed him, and as we led him to the patrol car, he kept muttering incoherent things about love, possession, and how he and the woman were destined to be together. It was disturbing. We returned to the house to inform the woman. She was huddled in the bathroom, hugging her knees, and when we told her he was in custody, she broke down in tears of relief. But the look of terror in her eyes never completely went away. We knew that, although the nightmare of that night was over, the trauma would haunt her for a long time. That kind of fear, that sense that you'll never be truly safe, it doesn't heal easily. He won't stop," she said, her voice shaking. "Even locked up, he always finds a way."
It was close to 2 in the morning when the radio went off. The call was from a woman saying she'd been followed by a car ever since she left a diner on the highway. Another one of those situations that could end in many different ways, none of them sounding good. Trevor, my partner, knew what to do. He sped up and turned on the patrol car lights. I looked at him, focused, and already knew the tension would only grow as we got closer to the location. "Let's hope this is just a misunderstanding, but something tells me this night won't end well," he said, eyes fixed on the road. I nodded, but deep down I also knew this could be a lot more serious than it seemed. We reached the highway. It was one of those roads that cut through the city and led to more remote areas, almost completely dark, with trees on both sides forming eerie, sinister tunnels. The woman's car was pulled over on the shoulder, headlights on, and she was inside. About 100 meters or so behind her was the other car, its headlights off. I walked up to the woman's car. The rain had started again, a light drizzle. When I got to the window, she rolled it down, and I could see her face more clearly. She was nervous, her eyes wide, hands trembling on the steering wheel. She looked to be in her early 30s, hair tied back in a ponytail, and it seemed like she had spent most of the night trying to hold herself together. "Are you okay? Can you tell me what happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "He's been following me since the diner. I noticed him watching me while I was eating. I thought it was just a coincidence, but as soon as I left, he was right behind me. And now he's there, waiting," she said quickly, almost out of breath. "What happened at the diner? Did he do anything besides stare?" I continued, trying to get a clearer picture of the situation. "No, he didn't do anything. He just kept staring. You know that weird look? Like he knew something about me that I didn't even know myself. I got uncomfortable, paid my bill, and left quickly. He's been following me ever since," she answered, her voice still shaking. She looked exhausted, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. It wasn't just about being followed. It was the way he looked at her, like something was seriously wrong. The kind of thing you can't explain, only feel. "Don't worry, we'll take care of this," I said, trying to offer some comfort. "We're going to talk to him and see what he has to say." As I stepped away from her car, I motioned to Trevor, who was already heading towards the man's vehicle. When we got there, he was still sitting behind the wheel. A middle-aged guy, nothing special about him. Gray hair, unshaven. But his smile, it was odd. He seemed way too calm for what was happening. "Good evening, sir. Can you tell me what you're doing here?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like his answer. He smiled. "Good evening, officer. I was just following that woman because I thought she was an old friend of mine from school." "Since the diner?" I asked back, crossing my arms and looking him straight in the eyes. "Yes, I just wanted to make sure it was her," he replied, like it was the most normal thing in the world to follow someone for miles down a deserted road. I glanced at Trevor, who already knew what to do. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, please," he said, but the man hesitated. The smile faded, and he started to get restless. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, fidgeting with his hands on the steering wheel. That's for us to decide. Now step out of the car, I repeated, not in the mood for games. When he finally got out, the first thing I noticed was the nervousness. That smug smile was gone, and now he was sweating. We did a quick search of his car, and that's when things took a turn. In the trunk, we found ropes and a knife. Not just any knife, a big one, the kind that shouldn't be in the trunk of someone who just wanted to make sure he was following an old friend from school. Care to explain this? I asked, holding up the knife so he could see it. The guy went silent, staring at the ground. He knew he was caught. Trevor was already cuffing him, and I went back to the woman's car. She was still there, staring straight ahead, like she didn't even want to blink. We've arrested the guy. He won't be following you anymore. We're taking him to the station now, I said, approaching her window. She let out a sigh, but she still seemed shaken. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. It's going to be all right. Do you want to come down to the station to give a statement now? I asked. She nodded, still in shock. Yes, I want to do that now. I don't want him out there. We took the guy to the station, and on the way, he didn't say a word. That smile was gone completely, and now he just stared straight ahead, like he was processing what had happened. The woman followed behind us, still nervous but a bit calmer than before. At the station, while we were preparing the report, the woman gave more details. Sitting across from the desk, she still looked agitated, but now she could speak more clearly. He just kept watching me the whole time. I was eating alone, and when I noticed he wouldn't stop staring, I started to feel uncomfortable. But he didn't do anything, so I tried to ignore it, she said, eyes fixed on the desk. When I left, he left right behind me. That's when I knew it wasn't a coincidence. He followed me the whole way down the highway, and the faster I went, the closer he seemed to get. I thought about stopping, but I was scared of what he might do. That's when I called the police. When I saw your car, I noticed he stopped a little further back. Did I do the right thing by calling you guys? She asked, a bit hesitant. You did the right thing. If you hadn't called, things could have been a lot worse, I said, being straightforward. There was no point sugarcoating the situation. She needed to know the danger was real, and she did the only thing she could. After we finished her statement, she thanked us again and left, visibly shaken but relieved. Meanwhile, we went to the cell where the guy was being held. He was sitting in the corner, head down, like he had nothing left to say. What's your story? What were you going to do with those ropes and that knife? I asked, straight to the point. He slowly lifted his head, that strange smile creeping back onto his face. I just wanted to talk. That's all. She was my friend. She just doesn't remember me. Anger rose in my chest, but I kept calm. It was obvious he had something else in mind, but he wasn't going to admit it. Guys like him rarely do. The ropes and the knife, that wasn't a coincidence. This guy had a plan, and if he'd had the chance, it would have ended a lot worse. Well, now you'll have plenty of time to think about it, I said before walking out of the cell. That night, on the way home, what bothered me the most was how normal everything seemed until it wasn't. A woman leaving a diner, a man watching from afar, and suddenly a chase that almost ended in tragedy. The worst part was knowing guys like that were out there, creating stories in their heads, believing people were characters in their twisted fantasies. I thought about the woman, how she'd carry on after this experience. Maybe she'd be paranoid for a while, looking over her shoulder every time she was alone. Maybe she'd never feel comfortable in a public place again. And the guy? He probably wouldn't be in jail for long, and I feared that when he got out, he'd try the same thing with another woman, or maybe even her again. This was the kind of case that stuck with you. It wasn't about solving a crime, it was about realizing how fragile people's safety could be. A life that in the blink of an eye could be threatened by someone left me with a knot in my stomach. The knife, the ropes, we got to him in time. But I kept thinking, what if we hadn't?
I received an emergency call around 10 p.m. The loud ring snapped me out of my thoughts, and the dispatcher answered immediately. She barely started speaking before signaling me to pay attention. A young woman was in a panic on the other end of the line, her voice trembling and filled with fear. There's a man at my door. He's yelling, saying we're meant to be together. I don't know what to do. He won't leave. Her voice sounded muffled, probably because she was speaking from a room inside the house, locked in. Calm down, ma'am. Can you tell us where you live? The dispatcher asked, and the woman quickly gave her address, almost out of breath. I was already grabbing my gear while listening to the conversation. I knew I had to get there as fast as possible. He said he met me online, but I barely exchanged a few messages with him, she continued, her voice almost disappearing with nervousness. I blocked him after a few days because he got weird, but now he showed up at my door. Owen, my partner, jumped into the patrol car and sped off. What's the situation? He asked, maneuvering through the wet streets. A guy's at a woman's house, says they met online. He's outside yelling that they're supposed to be together, I explained, already feeling the tension building. She blocked him, but somehow he found out where she lives. Owen huffed. These crazies who think they can control other people's lives. We need to handle this quickly. When we reached the street, I saw the man outside. He was pounding on the door with his fists, shouting like he was demanding something, not caring who might hear. It was a quiet street with little activity. The house was simple. The lights on the upper floor were on, indicating the woman was locked away, keeping her distance from him. She knows. She knows we're meant to be together, he yelled while hitting the door. I was getting out of the patrol car when the guy turned to face me. He was around 35 years old, unshaven, with a look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Sir, I'm going to ask you to step away from the door, I said, keeping my hand close to my gun but not drawing it yet. He smiled, a disturbing smile. She called me here. We're soulmates. Sir, I'm asking you again, step away from the door and let's talk, I repeated, more firmly this time. He took a step back, still smiling like nothing about the situation was unusual. Owen was already by my side, watching closely. The guy finally moved away from the door, and the woman appeared at the upstairs window, opening it just a crack. I don't know him. He showed up here and I never gave him my address. Please make him leave, she cried out, her voice desperate. Sir, how did you find out where she lives? I asked, already knowing his answer wouldn't put me at ease. We met online. It was fate that brought us together. We have so much in common. It was easy to figure out. I followed the clues. She wanted me to come, he responded. Owen was already losing patience. This isn't how you deal with someone you barely know. You're going to have to come with us. Realizing the conversation was over, the guy started to resist. He tried to rush back to the door, but Owen was faster and restrained him. He kept muttering as he was handcuffed, saying things about destiny, about how they were meant to be together. The whole scene was unsettling. The woman was still at the window, looking utterly terrified. She couldn't believe that a man she had exchanged just a few messages with had shown up at her door. After we put him in the patrol car, I went upstairs to speak with the woman. She was still pale, her eyes red from crying, and she was trembling. The whole house was locked up, every window, every door. She wasn't taking any chances. Are you okay? I asked, trying to speak in the calmest voice possible. I don't know, she replied, taking a deep breath. I don't understand how he got here. We chatted for a few days in an online chat room. At first, he seemed normal, even friendly. But then he started saying we were perfect for each other, that we had to be together. I blocked him immediately because it was getting weird. But he didn't stop. She sat on the couch, running her hands over her face, still trembling. I got emails, messages from unknown numbers. He found me on other social media platforms. And now, he shows up here. I never gave him my address. He never knew where I lived. That was concerning. We needed to figure out how he got all that information. He must have found out through your social media. Maybe he saw something that led him to you. These guys get obsessed and will do anything to track someone down, I explained. She nodded, but the terror in her eyes was still clear. What if he comes back? What if he doesn't stop? We're taking him to the station and he'll be investigated. You did the right thing by calling us. The faster we act, the less chance he has to do something worse, I said, trying to reassure her. For now, just try to stay calm. We'll make sure he stays away from you. She stayed silent, but it was obvious she was still scared. She knew, just as I did, that sometimes jail or a restraining order isn't enough to stop someone like him. People like that are unpredictable. At the station, the man was booked, and we began the investigation. We seized his computer, and what we found was worse than we imagined. When we accessed his personal files, there were hundreds of photos of the woman. Some were public photos she had posted on social media, but others were grotesque montages of the two of them together in moments that had never happened. "Look at this," Owen called me over, pointing at the screen. One of the montages showed them side by side on a beach. The quality of the edit was terrible, but what was most disturbing was the level of obsession it revealed. In another file, there were a series of videos he had edited with photos of her, mixing in scenes from romantic movies and voiceovers he had recorded, as if he was speaking directly to her. But the most disturbing of all was a montage where she was holding a baby. It was a distorted image, clearly made with edited photos, but the meaning was clear. He saw a future with her that never existed, and the level of delusion in his mind was profound. "This guy, he really thinks they have a life together," I commented, scrolling through the photos and videos. "This isn't just a regular stalker, he's completely obsessed." Owen shook his head. "These types, they don't take no for an answer. In his mind, she belongs to him, and that's dangerous." When we showed this to her, the woman broke down. The terror on her face was real. This kind of thing, it's not something you forget easily. The guy genuinely believed they were meant to be together. I had no idea a few exchanged messages could turn into this. We handed over the information for the formal investigation, and the guy would remain in custody until trial. The woman would be kept informed, but we already knew that, even with the evidence, her fear wouldn't go away anytime soon. The fact that he knew so much about her without her ever sharing any personal information was enough to leave her traumatized by his obsession for a long time. If you enjoyed these stories, help us keep bringing more like them by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel.